The emergency klaxons of the Galactic Medical Academy screamed through the pristine corridors as Transport Shuttle 7429 docked at the trauma bay. What emerged would challenge everything the galaxy's finest medical minds thought they knew about the limits of biological survival. Zixtal, a third-year Korthani medical student, pressed her crystalline face against the observation deck's viewport. Her exoskeleton flickered with nervous bioluminescence as she watched the medical team rush toward the incoming patient. The rescue team found him 6 standard hours later, his primitive EVA suit breached in 17 places, his body exposed to the lethal vacuum of space, cosmic radiation, and temperatures that should have flash-frozen every cell in his body. And yet, as the medical team wheeled him into the trauma bay, Kane was not only conscious but actively trying to sit up on the gurney. "Easy there, patient," clicked Dr. Kethmore, the Academy's head of emergency medicine. His chitinous Zilnari form towered over the examination table as his medical scanner emitted increasingly frantic beeping sounds. "Your biological readings are unprecedented." Kane looked around the sterile white room with mild curiosity. "Doc, I appreciate the concern, but I'm feeling all right. Little chilly, and my arm's definitely broken, but nothing I haven't dealt with before." The medical scanner in Dr. Kethmore's manipulator began smoking and emitted what sounded like electronic weeping. "Nothing you haven't dealt with before?" Dr. Kethmore's voice cracked through the universal translator. "Captain Kane, you've survived explosive decompression, thermal shock, radiation exposure levels that would kill a Hraxi warbeast, and oxygen deprivation that should have rendered your neural tissue completely non-functional." Kane shrugged with his uninjured shoulder. "Tuesday was definitely one of the rougher days I've had recently." In the observation deck, Dr. HFY, the Academy's most respected xenobiology professor, materialized in her environmental containment suit, her gaseous Vorthan form undulating with what her species considered deep contemplation. "Students," her voice resonated through the chamber, "prepare yourselves. What you're about to witness will require us to fundamentally reconsider our understanding of biological resilience." Below them, Kane was now engaging in casual conversation with the increasingly panicked medical staff, his vital signs defying every law of physiology in the galactic medical database. His body temperature fluctuated wildly between hypothermic and fever levels, his blood pressure readings were mathematically impossible, and his cellular regeneration rate was already showing signs of active repair. "Professor," Zixtal's voice synthesizer crackled with anticipation. "How many biological impossibilities should we expect from this human?" Dr. Techwesessian's containment suit dimmed as she observed Kane cheerfully asking a terrified nurse if the medical facility had coffee, apparently oblivious to the fact that half the monitoring equipment had begun malfunctioning simply from attempting to process his vital signs. "My dear students," Dr. Techwesessian replied, "I suggest you prepare additional data storage. We're about to discover why humans are considered the galaxy's most medically non-compliant species." 72 hours after admission, the Galactic Medical Academy's finest physicians gathered in the conference room with expressions that defied universal translation. Captain Kane's recovery wasn't just impossible. It was aggressively violating every law of biology they'd spent centuries establishing. Dr. Techuasian's environmental suit flickered with what her species considered profound bewilderment as she reviewed the morning reports. Colleagues, in my 4 decades of xenobiology, I have never encountered cellular regeneration rates that actually accelerate over time. Zixtal's crystalline exoskeleton pulsed with nervous energy as she consulted her data pad. Professor, the human's healing rate is now 400% faster than the regenerate lizard people, a species that evolved specifically for rapid tissue repair. His broken arm has not only healed, but the bone density scans show it's 60% stronger than before the fracture. Impossible, chittered Dr. Kethmore, his medical scanner now permanently smoking. Biological systems don't improve from trauma. They repair to previous functionality at best. Velnox's tentacles writhed with agitation. That's not the most disturbing part. His muscle mass has increased by 30% in 3 days. Without hormonal enhancement or genetic modification, the human is somehow converting ambient energy into functional tissue. Through the observation window, they could see the source of their scientific crisis in the rehabilitation wing. Captain Kane was engaged in what he cheerfully called light exercise, bench-pressing equipment designed for Hraxi warbeasts, while maintaining casual conversation with his increasingly terrified physical therapist. "Morning, everyone," Kane called out, waving with his formerly broken arm. "Doc, your rehab equipment is fantastic, though I think I might need something a bit more challenging." The Quillan physical therapist, a species whose homeworld had gravity 3 times Earth normal, cowered behind his clipboard. "Captain Kane, you're currently lifting the equivalent of a small cargo shuttle. This equipment was designed for the strongest species in known space." Kane added another weight plate with casual ease. "Really? My buddy Martinez back on Europa Station could probably handle twice this. Of course, he did get enhanced after that incident with the neutron star." Dr. Kethmore's chitinous plates rattled as he scuttled into the room with fresh test results. "Captain, your cardiovascular system has developed what appears to be auxiliary chambers. Your respiratory efficiency has improved by 200%, and your neural response time is now faster than our computers can measure." Kane paused mid-lift, considering this information seriously. "Ha! That explains why everything feels so slow around here. I was wondering if you folks were naturally this relaxed or if there was something in the air." In the corner, a crystalline medical technician attempted to take readings with increasingly sophisticated equipment, each device failing spectacularly when confronted with Kane's impossible physiology. The technician's harmonic resonance had shifted to what roughly translated as existential despair. "Captain Kane," Zixtal ventured, her voice synthesizer crackling with scientific curiosity, "is this level of adaptation typical for your species?" Kane switched to one-handed lifting while scratching his head thoughtfully. "Well, humans are pretty adaptable. My grandmother always said we're like cosmic weeds. Put us anywhere and we'll not only survive, we'll probably end up running the place within a generation." The rehabilitation equipment began emitting warning sounds as Kane unconsciously increased his pace, the safety protocols triggering alerts that the machinery was approaching structural failure. Dr. Thyssen's environmental suit dimmed to its lowest setting. "Students, I'm beginning to suspect that humans don't just recover from trauma, they weaponize it into evolutionary advantages." "Is that scientifically possible?" whispered Velnox. "Apparently, when dealing with humans, scientifically possible is more of a suggestion than a rule." The Academy's Nutrition Analysis Laboratory had processed dietary requirements for over 3,000 species during its distinguished history. None had prepared the staff for the gastronomical nightmare that was human nutritional assessment. Dr. Velnox floated nervously beside the food synthesizer, his tentacles quivering as he reviewed the morning's test results. "The readings can't be accurate," he muttered, recalibrating his scanner for the 15th time. "No biological entity voluntarily consumes this many toxins." Zixtal's crystalline form flickered with distressed bioluminescence as she studied the nutritional analysis charts. "Professor HFY Captain Kane has consumed 47 different substances classified as hazardous to carbon-based life, and rated them for flavor preference." Dr. HFY's environmental suit hummed with what might have been resigned acceptance. "Students, observe today's breakfast session and prepare to document another fundamental challenge to xenobiology." Through the laboratory's viewing screen, they watched Captain Kane cheerfully working his way through what the nutrition staff had optimistically labeled a tolerance test, a selection of the galaxy's most dangerous edible substances, arranged from mildly toxic to industrial solvent. "This Vorthan acid fruit has excellent complexity," Kane announced to the horrified Pixari nutrition technician, taking another enthusiastic bite of something that glowed ominously green. "Great heat, nice citrus notes. Reminds me of those ghost peppers my grandmother grew in her radiation garden back on Mars." The nutrition technician's fur had shifted from its natural silver to stress white. "Captain Kane, that fruit is used to etch hull plating on starships. Its acid content could dissolve most metallic alloys." Kane nodded appreciatively. "Yeah, you can taste the mineral content. Very authentic. Could use some salt, though." Dr. Kethmore scuttled into the observation room, his latest medical scanner already showing signs of electronic distress. "Colleagues, I bring disturbing updates. The human has requested what he calls proper coffee and claims our industrial-grade stimulants are barely adequate for staying awake." Velnox's tentacles curled in disbelief. "But our stimulants are designed for emergency revival of comatose Hraxi war beasts." Apparently, Dr. Kethmore continued, consulting his smoking data pad, "Captain Kane usually consumes something called void station brew, which our chemical analysis indicates contains 17 compounds that would constitute biological warfare agents under galactic law." On the viewing screen, Kane had moved to the next course, a Zilnari protein cube that was literally pulsing with radioactive isotopes, its surface temperature hovering just below the melting point of lead. "Oh, this brings back memories," Kane said, ignoring the fact that the cube was leaving scorch marks on the titanium serving tray. "Reminds me of that barbecue place near the Jupiter shipyards. They served irradiated kaiju steaks that were still glowing when they brought them to your table. Great for building muscle mass." The nutrition technician had begun quietly updating their last will and testament on a nearby datapad. Zixtal's voice synthesizer crackled with scientific horror. "Professor, how is his digestive system processing these substances without catastrophic cellular damage?" Dr. HFY's environmental suit dimmed thoughtfully. "Students, I've been researching human evolutionary history. Their homeworld appears to have been actively hostile to life. They developed digestive systems capable of extracting nutrition from what other species would classify as chemical weapons. What do humans consider genuinely dangerous to consume?" whispered Velnox. After a long pause, Dr. HFY consulted her data archives. "According to my research, very little. They have a cultural saying, if it doesn't kill you immediately, season it well and call it dinner." Kane had now progressed to dessert, a crystalline energy matrix that was literally composed of contained plasma. He took a bite and smiled warmly. "Tastes like birthday cake," he announced happily, his mouth glowing with barely contained nuclear fusion. "You folks really know how to make a guest feel welcome." The nutrition technician finally collapsed, overwhelmed by the impossibility of safely feeding a species that treated cosmic hazards as condiments. Dr. Zephyra's 13 consciousness centers had analyzed the psychological profiles of over 4,000 sentient species during her distinguished career at the Academy. Her advanced Kytherian neural matrix, capable of processing 17 different layers of reality simultaneously, was considered the pinnacle of xenopsychological analysis. Captain Marcus Kane had reduced her to a state of existential confusion in under 30 minutes. The evaluation logs are... Dr. Zephyra paused, her bioluminescent cranium flickering through patterns that had no translation in any known language, unprecedented in the annals of psychological science. The gathered medical students shifted uncomfortably as their professor's usually radiant form dimmed to barely perceptible levels. Zixtal's crystalline exoskeleton pulsed with nervous energy, while Velnox's tentacles writhed in anticipation. What exactly occurred during the assessment? Velnox asked, his universal translator struggling to convey his species' equivalent of morbid fascination. Dr. Zephyra activated the session hologram with visible reluctance. The standard evaluation. In the present, Dr. Zephyra paused the recording, her 13 consciousness centers flickering with what could only be described as philosophical distress. Students, at this point in the evaluation, my equipment began what I can only characterize as experiencing a collective nervous breakdown. What was his psychological trauma index? Zixtal asked, consulting her notes with scientific precision. -23. The room fell silent. Velnox's tentacles went completely limp. Negative? How is that mathematically possible? Apparently, Dr. Zephyra continued, her voice carrying undertones of scientific defeat. Exposure to our most advanced psychological stress tests actually relaxed him. He found them soothing compared to a typical day on Earth, and asked if we had any more challenging material. The hologram resumed. Dr. Zephyra was now displaying images of galactic predators so terrifying that their mere photographs required psychological preparation for safe viewing. "Oh, cool!" Kane exclaimed with childlike delight. "That one looks exactly like my Aunt Margaret's cat, Mr. Whiskers. Same tentacles, same rows of teeth, same existential dread in the eyes. He was a real sweetheart once you learned where he liked to be scratched." Dr. Zephyra's cranium dimmed to its lowest possible setting. "Students, I have concluded that humans don't suffer from psychological trauma. They're bored by it. Their baseline mental state appears to be, everything is terrible and that's perfectly normal." The Academy's Department of Interspecies Social Dynamics had successfully facilitated peaceful interactions between the galaxy's most disparate civilizations for over 2 centuries. Their sophisticated models could predict and prevent conflicts between species separated by billions of years of evolution, fundamental differences in biology, and incompatible concepts of reality itself. Captain Marcus Kane had rendered their entire theoretical framework obsolete in 4 days. Dr. Quintar, a distinguished Harmonite social anthropologist whose species had evolved specifically for diplomatic mediation, observed the cafeteria through the observation deck with her harmonic resonance patterns shifting through frequencies that had no equivalent in standard communication protocols. "I don't understand," she hummed, her melodic voice carrying undertones of profound confusion. "Every social integration model we've developed predicted either aggressive territorial dominance displays or defensive isolation behaviors. Instead, we have this. Below them, Captain Kane had somehow become the unofficial social nucleus of the entire medical facility. An unprecedented gathering of species, many of whom had never successfully coexisted in the same space, surrounded his table in what could only be described as voluntary congregation. Zixtal consulted her behavioral analysis scanner, its display flickering with error messages. Professor, he's simultaneously terrifying and comforting 23 different species. Our social dynamic prediction computers have experienced cascading system failures trying to process the contradictory data. At the center of the impossible gathering, Kane was enthusiastically recounting what the universal translators interpreted as a moderately interesting Tuesday adventure. So there I was, hanging upside down in a gravitational anomaly. Kane gestured with his fork, which held what appeared to be a still-writhing Vorthan delicacy. My partner Rodriguez is unconscious, our ship's reactor is overloading, and this massive space kraken, easily the size of a small moon, decides it wants to add us to its afternoon snack menu. A cluster of Pixari students, normally the most anxiety-prone species in known space, sat transfixed, their fur standing on end with excitement rather than their characteristic terror. Beside them, a Hraxi war beast that could level city blocks listened with rapt attention, its massive combat appendages folded politely. Velnox's tentacles writhed with incomprehension. He's describing a scenario that would require immediate psychological intervention for trauma response, and they're entertained? But what did you do? Squeaked a tiny Pixari engineer, her voice carrying none of the species' typical fear responses. Kane shrugged with characteristic nonchalance. Well, I figured if you can't beat them, join them. So I cut myself free from the safety harness, swam through the vacuum to the Kraken, and introduced myself properly, with a solid punch to what I hoped was its primary sensory cluster. The cafeteria erupted in multi-species appreciation. Chittering, harmonious chiming, bioluminescent flashing, and the deep rumbling that passed for Hraxi laughter. A crystalline diplomat actually applauded with appendages that could cut through molecular bonds. Dr. Quintar's harmonic frequencies shifted to what roughly translated as existential bewilderment. Students, he just described committing assault against a cosmic-level predator with his bare hands. And somehow this has increased his social standing across 17 different cultural frameworks. Did the introduction work? Asked Dr. Kethmore, who had apparently abandoned all pretense of professional medical detachment. Turns out space krakens appreciate directness, Kane replied as if this was perfectly reasonable. Once I got its attention, we had a very civilized conversation. Rodriguez speaks fluent deep void languages. That's where we learned krakens have incredibly sophisticated poetry traditions. A young Vorthan student's bioluminescent patterns shifted to amazement. You befriended a cosmic predator through literature? Poetry transcends species barriers, Kane explained with the casual wisdom of someone who regularly survived impossible situations. Plus, they make excellent travel companions once you establish mutual respect. Very philosophical. The Academy's Grand Medical Symposium had never hosted an emergency session quite like this one. Representatives from every major medical institution across 17 sectors crowded into the amphitheater, their various forms of scientific anxiety creating a cacophony of clicks, hums, bioluminescent flashes, and harmonic resonances that threatened to overwhelm the universal translation systems. Dr. Tevesian floated at the center podium in her environmental suit, her Vorthan gas form undulating with what her species considered profound scientific bewilderment. Behind her, holographic displays showed Captain Kane's medical data, charts and graphs that seemed to mock several fundamental laws of physics and at least 12 established principles of biology. Esteemed colleagues, she began, her voice carrying through the chamber's advanced acoustic systems. After 3 weeks of comprehensive analysis, I present the most medically impossible patient in recorded galactic history. Dr. SYXNth, a renowned quantum biologist whose species existed simultaneously across 23 dimensions, flickered through several probability states before stabilizing on what roughly translated as scientific horror. The cellular regeneration data alone requires us to rewrite our understanding of thermodynamics. This human appears to be generating functional tissue from quantum vacuum fluctuations. Indeed, Dr. HFY confirmed, activating the next display sequence. Captain Kane's wound healing rate has not only accelerated during his stay, but now violates the conservation of mass energy. We've documented his body creating new bone matrix that's measurably denser than the original structure, apparently converting ambient electromagnetic radiation into calcium phosphate compounds. A collective shudder rippled through the assembly, or the equivalent response across multiple species whose anatomy didn't technically support shuddering. Zixtal raised her crystalline manipulator from the student observation section. "Professor, could you elaborate on the gravity resistance test results?" The central display shifted to show security footage of Kane jogging casually on a treadmill while gravitational field generators steadily increased the local space-time curvature around him. "We terminated the experiment at 18 times Earth standard gravity," Dr. HFY announced, "not due to any physiological distress from Captain Kane, but because our equipment reached critical structural failure thresholds." On the recording, Kane was visible maintaining an animated conversation with increasingly panicked technicians while running at a pace that should have compressed his skeletal structure into a two-dimensional approximation of human anatomy. "This is fantastic," his recorded voice echoed through the amphitheater. "Reminds me of training exercises back on Europa Station, though Sergeant Williams there had us running through actual black hole event horizons. This is definitely more relaxing." Dr. Kethmore scuttled to the secondary podium, his chitinous Zilnari plates rattling with medical distress. "Colleagues, I must present the cardiovascular impossibilities. During his residence with us, the human circulatory system has spontaneously developed auxiliary chambers, secondary arterial pathways, and what appears to be a backup heart." The amphitheater fell silent except for the sound of several medical computers experiencing cascading logic failures. "Backup heart?" wheezed Dr. Fluxera, whose gaseous Nebulian form contracted with shock. "Cardiac architecture is genetically fixed in mature organisms across all known species. Apparently not for humans," Dr. Kethmore replied, consulting his perpetually smoking scanner. "When we inquired about this development, Captain Kane said, and I quote, 'Oh yeah, that happens sometimes when you work out in weird gravity fields. My buddy Patterson grew an extra lung after doing construction work in a temporal distortion zone. Really improved his stamina.'" Dr. Zafera's bioluminescent cranium pulsed weakly from the psychology section. The neurological assessment reveals even more disturbing data. The human brain appears to be actively rewriting its own neural architecture in real time, developing new cognitive pathways to process information more efficiently. "Evolution doesn't function at that velocity," protested Dr. Vimuller, a distinguished silicon-based geneticist whose crystalline form was vibrating with academic distress. "Biological adaptation requires geological timescales. Apparently," Dr. Zafera continued, "humans operate under different evolutionary parameters." When I mentioned this phenomenon to Captain Kane, he attributed it to finally having time to focus on the daily crossword puzzles. Velnox tentatively raised several tentacles from the advanced studies section. "Professors, what is the current official medical classification for humans?" Dr. HFY's environmental suit dimmed as she consulted the Academy's master database. "We've been forced to create an entirely new taxonomic category, biologically non-compliant adaptive life form. And the unofficial classification? Medically impossible with a tendency toward casual reality violation." 3 weeks and 17 shattered scientific paradigms after Captain Kane's arrival, the Academy's medical staff prepared to confront the most unsettling truth of their careers. Their patient wasn't merely healed. He had somehow transcended his original biological specifications entirely. The main auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as faculty and students gathered for what administrators had diplomatically termed a comprehensive case conclusion ceremony. In reality, it was an attempt to process the collective trauma of having their understanding of medicine, biology, and physics systematically dismantled by one impossibly resilient human. Dr. Tevesian floated at the central podium, her environmental suit humming with what her species considered fond bewilderment mixed with professional defeat. "Esteemed colleagues and dedicated students," she began, "today we conclude our study of the most educationally disruptive patient in Academy history." Captain Kane stood beside her on the stage, radiating health in ways that violated several conservation laws. His rescue ship, appropriately named Inevitable Consequences, waited in the docking bay, its crew having arrived that morning with what they cheerfully described as a completely standard human rescue vessel that happened to be held together with optimism, engineering tape, and what appeared to be controlled miniature black holes. Before Captain Kane returns to what he assures us is normal human civilization, Dr. Tevesian continued, he has graciously agreed to address any final inquiries from our medical community. Zixdal's crystalline form immediately brightened with anticipation. Captain Kane, after experiencing our most advanced medical... Kane's expression shifted to what the aliens had learned to recognize as his explaining basic human nature face, a look that invariably preceded the destruction of another scientific assumption. "Look," he said, gesturing toward the viewing port where Earth hung as a distant blue speck. "Humans evolved on a planet that's essentially a cosmic death trap. Everything there is actively trying to kill you. The weather systems can level continents, the native predators hunt in coordinated packs, the plant life is frequently toxic, the geological activity can reshape entire landmasses overnight, and most of our traditional cuisine is either poisonous or actively fighting back." Dr. Kethmore's chitinous plates clattered nervously. "But how does your species achieve survival under such hostile conditions?" "We adapt, and then we get stubborn about it," Kane replied with a grin that had become legendary among the medical staff. "See, the thing about humans is we don't just survive horrible situations, we take them personally. The universe tries to kill us, and we consider that a challenge rather than a warning." A young Pixari student, trembling with equal parts terror and fascination, managed to squeak out, "What happens when humans encounter something genuinely dangerous?" Kane's smile widened in a way that made several species simultaneously reconsider their positions in the galactic hierarchy. "We make friends with it, fight it until it respects us, turn it into food, or adopt it as a pet. Sometimes all four, depending on the situation." The auditorium fell into contemplative silence as various civilizations processed the implications of an entire planet populated by beings who considered cosmic horror a minor inconvenience. Dr. Zafara's bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly. "Captain Kane, one final question for our records. What guidance should we provide to other medical facilities regarding human patients?" Kane thought for a moment, absently flexing his formerly broken arm that was now demonstrably stronger than before his injury. "Tell them we're actually pretty low maintenance. We mostly just need coffee, something constructive to do, and maybe some basic tools. Oh, and if we say we're fine, we're probably fine. We're generally pretty good at self-assessment when it comes to actual medical emergencies." He looked around the assembled crowd of medical professionals who had spent 3 weeks having their fundamental understanding of biology challenged, revised, and occasionally set on fire. "Also," he added with genuine warmth, "thanks for taking such excellent care of me. This was honestly one of the better medical experiences I've had. Way better than that time on Proxima Beta when they tried to treat my sprained ankle by suggesting immediate amputation." Several medical professionals experienced simultaneous existential crises. As Kane walked toward the exit, followed by the sound of medical equipment spontaneously developing anxiety disorders. Dr. Tetwasasian addressed her audience one final time. Students and colleagues, today you have learned the most crucial lesson in xenobiology. Never underestimate a species that considers may you live in interesting times to be a curse rather than an adventure. Remember, somewhere in this galaxy, there's an entire world of these creatures, all convinced they're perfectly ordinary. Through the viewing port, they watched the inevitable consequences depart, its hull apparently held together by sheer determination and what looked suspiciously like standard maintenance tape, yet somehow achieving faster-than-light travel through principles that made their physics computers weep. Professor, Sixtal asked quietly, what have we truly learned from this experience? Dr. HFY's environmental suit dimmed thoughtfully. That humans don't survive impossible situations because they're invincible, my dear student. They survive because they're too stubborn to realize they should be dead, too curious to stop exploring, and too optimistic to accept that something can't be fixed with enough coffee and creative problem-solving. In the distance, Kane's ship disappeared into hyperspace with a sound that resembled cosmic laughter mixed with the gentle hum of well-maintained engines. The Academy's medical equipment, finally free from the impossibility of processing human physiology, quietly resumed normal operations with what could only be described as electronic relief. But in the medical archives, a new permanent classification remained: human, biologically non-compliant adaptive life form. Recommend supportive care, adequate coffee supply, and fundamental revision of known scientific principles. And somewhere in the nursing station, a hastily installed sign read, "It has been 0 days since a human made our medical equipment question the nature of reality. It would remain at 0 for the foreseeable future."